My name is Noah Reed, and I was 16 years old when my stepfather threw me out of our house in Birmingham, Alabama. He didn't whisper. He didn't even look ashamed. He stood in the doorway, blocking out the porch light behind him, his arms crossed like a wall. Then he said it, the words that have never stopped echoing in my mind. You're not my blood. You're not my problem. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. Those words hit like a hammer. I felt the air in my chest collapse, like he'd ripped out the last piece of safety I had. My mom, Laura, stood behind him. Her hands trembled at the hem of her sweater. She wanted to speak, I could see it, but fear sealed her mouth. She'd been living under his control for years, a ghost in her own house. When she finally whispered, "I'm sorry, Noah. Please forgive me," it sounded like someone who had already given up. That night, I stepped into the darkness with only a backpack and a small silver locket she'd given me when I was a kid. It had always been the one thing that reminded me of the father I never met. When the door slammed behind me, I knew that sound wasn't just wood meeting metal. It was my childhood ending. I slept under the old railroad bridge that night. The ground was cold and damp, and every car that passed overhead felt like thunder rolling through my bones. I remember staring at the stars and whispering to myself, why did my real father leave me? That question became my constant companion, heavier than hunger, sharper than the wind. But I wasn't always this lost. Before that night, I had a life, if you could call it that. I grew up in a small Alabama town, just me and Mom. She worked at a grocery store, coming home with tired eyes but always with a gentle smile that made the house feel less empty. When I was younger, I'd ask her about my dad. Every time, her answer was the same. Your father loved you, Noah. But he couldn't be here. As a child, I believed it. As a teenager, it started to sound like a story she told herself to stay strong. Then, when I was 10, she remarried. That's when Colton Briggs walked into our lives, the man who would eventually erase me from it. Colton ran a scrapyard outside of town. Always smelled of gasoline and whiskey, wore oil-stained shirts even to church. The kind of man who looked at you once and made you feel 2 inches tall. At first, I tried to believe he might be the dad I'd been missing. I wanted someone to throw a ball with, someone to tell me what being a man meant. But Colton didn't see me as family. He saw me as proof my mother had loved someone before him. He never called me Noah. To him, I was just boy. Boy, did you finish your chores? Boy, get me a beer. Boy, don't talk back. The night I got a B on my math test, he sneered across the dinner table and said, "You'll never make it anywhere with grades like that. You ain't built for more." I remember trying to stand up for myself once. I asked, "Can you just call me Noah?" He set his fork down slowly, his eyes cold and metallic. "You earn a name in my house," he said. "Until then, you're just boy." My mom sat frozen, eyes on her plate. That silence became normal. Living with Colton was like living inside a thunderstorm, always waiting for the next strike. If I worked hard, he found fault. If I stayed quiet, he called me lazy. Nothing I did ever measured up. The only peace came after he went to bed. Mom would sneak into my room, tuck the blanket around me, and whisper, "You're stronger than you think, Noah. Just hold on." Those words carried me through nights when the walls felt too tight to breathe. But even then, I could see the exhaustion carving lines into her face. She was fading, trapped between survival and guilt. By the time I turned 15, I started dreaming of leaving. I mowed lawns, carried groceries for neighbors, stocked shelves at the corner store, anything to save a few dollars. Half went to Mom. The rest I hid in a sock under my mattress. I thought maybe one day I'd have enough to rent a room, finish high school, and start over somewhere far away. But Colton had other plans. He demanded I quit school to work full-time in his scrapyard. "What good's algebra when there's real work to be done?" he barked. I told him I wanted to graduate, maybe even go to college. He laughed, this dark, bitter sound that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. "You? College? Don't make me laugh. You'll be lucky if you don't end up sleeping under a bridge." Funny how life listens sometimes. That tension built until the walls of the house could barely hold it. I was 16, standing between who I wanted to be and the man determined to break me. The night it all finally snapped was humid, that southern kind of heat that sticks to your skin. Colton sat at the dinner table, half-drunk, reeking of oil and anger. He told me, "Starting Monday, you work for me, sun up to sundown." I told him I already had a job, at the corner store, and I wasn't quitting. His hand came down on the table so hard the dishes rattled. "You think you get to choose? Not in my house. You either work for me, or you don't live here." My heart pounded, but I said it anyway. "Then I don't live here." That was the last thing I ever said to him as his stepson. His face twisted into something unrecognizable. He stood, stepped forward until I could smell the whiskey on his breath, and whispered, "You're not my blood. You're not my problem." Then he grabbed my backpack from the corner, shoved it into my chest, and pushed me toward the door. Mom tried to stop him. She cried, begged him to stop. "Colton, please, he's just a boy." He shook her off like she was nothing. I turned to her one last time. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Noah. Please forgive me." Then the door slammed, and I was outside. Just like that, I wasn't anyone's son anymore. That was the night my childhood died, and the beginning of a story I never saw coming. The first night after Colton threw me out, I slept under that same railroad bridge. The ground was damp, the air heavy with the smell of rust and rain. Every passing car sounded like a threat, every creak of the bridge made my heart race. By morning, my backpack was my home, and the streets were my world. Days blurred into a pattern of survival. I found out which grocery stores tossed their expired bread behind the dumpsters. I learned that if I swept the gas station parking lot, the clerk would hand me a sandwich and a soda. I figured out which churches left their doors unlocked during the day so I could sit in the back pew, out of sight, pretending I belonged somewhere. But the hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was realizing that no one was coming for me. Every night, I'd close my eyes and hear Colton's words again. "You're not my blood. You're not my problem." And each time they echoed, they cut a little deeper. At first, I kept going back to the corner store, trying to hold on to my job. The owner, Mr. Evans, was kind. He didn't ask questions, but I knew he noticed when my clothes stayed wrinkled and my hair unwashed. One evening, he pulled me aside and said quietly, "Noah, you're a good kid, but customers talk. You can't keep coming in like this." "I'm sorry." I nodded, even though my throat burned. I told him I understood. He handed me my final paycheck, $48, and said, "Take care of yourself, son." I almost laughed at the word son. It sounded foreign coming from someone who didn't owe me anything. That night, I bought a burger from a diner and sat on the curb outside, eating it slowly, trying to make it last. I remember thinking how strange it was that food could make you cry. Not because it tasted good, but because it reminded you of what you'd lost. As the weeks passed, I started meeting other kids who lived the same way, outcasts and runaways who carried their whole world in a backpack. Some had been thrown out for stealing, some because of addiction, others because their parents just stopped caring. We shared what we had, half a loaf of bread, a blanket, stories about the people who broke us. There was a boy named Tyler who said his dad locked him out after finding cigarettes in his pocket. A girl named Reese told me her stepmother packed her bag, threw it on the lawn, and said, "You can live like your mother now." We were all broken in different ways, but that didn't make the nights easier. Some mornings I woke up to find one of them gone, taken in by police, by strangers, or by the cold. Every disappearance hit me harder. Each time it happened, I told myself, "Don't stop moving, Noah. Don't let the world erase you." I kept my mother's locket in my pocket. When things got unbearable, I'd grip it tight and whisper, "She's scared. She didn't choose this." But deep down, I wasn't sure if I believed that anymore. I was 16, dirty, hungry, invisible, and furious. That fury became my fuel. When the hunger clawed too deep, anger pushed me forward. When loneliness whispered that no one cared, anger drowned it out. And underneath it all, one question kept burning. Where was my real father? Why had he left me to this life? If he was alive, did he ever think about the son sleeping under bridges? That question turned into my heartbeat. And for years, it kept me alive. By 18, I'd stopped hoping for rescue. I learned how to blend in, how to find day work, how to keep quiet. I spent winters sleeping in bus stations, summers in construction sites that didn't ask questions as long as I worked hard. By 22, I drifted out of Alabama. Sometimes I hitchhiked. Sometimes I walked until my feet bled. I washed dishes in cheap motels, picked fruit in Georgia, cleaned barns in Tennessee. Every place I went, I left fast. Because every time someone tried to get close, I heard Colton's voice again. "You're not my blood." By 25, I didn't even recognize myself in mirrors anymore. My hands were rough, my face older than my years. I didn't smile much, mostly because I'd forgotten how. But even through all of that, a small piece of me still wondered, if I found my father one day, what would I even say? Would I scream? Cry? Ask him why he didn't come? There were nights I cursed his name, even though I didn't know it. And nights I begged him, whoever he was, to just give me a sign that I wasn't forgotten. Years passed. The anger hardened into survival. The hope shrank into a quiet ache. And then, one cold autumn morning when I was 30, life decided to answer me in a way I could never have imagined. I had been working as a dishwasher in a roadside diner just outside Lexington, Kentucky. It wasn't glamorous, just endless stacks of greasy plates, cracked hands, and water so hot it burned the skin raw. But it was steady. For the first time in years, I had a routine, a room above the hardware store, a paycheck every Friday, and food that didn't come from a dumpster. Still, I kept my head down. People came and went without noticing me. That was fine. I was used to being invisible. Then one evening, the bell above the diner's front door jingled. I barely noticed it over the sound of the sink. A few minutes later, a voice cut through the clatter of dishes. "Excuse me, is there a Noah Reed who works here?" I froze. No one ever said my name out loud anymore. No one even knew it. I stepped out from the kitchen, drying my hands on my apron. Standing by the counter was a tall man in a long dark coat, holding a leather folder under his arm. His eyes were sharp but kind, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and carried it quietly. "That's me," I said slowly. "I'm Noah." The man nodded. "My name's Samuel Crane," he said, voice steady. "I've been searching for you for 14 years. The diner went silent. A waitress stopped mid-step, a customer put down his coffee. I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Why?" I asked, barely able to get the word out. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, thick, sealed, and marked with my name. "Your father left instructions," he said quietly. "He wanted you found, no matter how long it took." The words hit like a thunderclap. My father. For years, that word had meant nothing but pain. And now, a stranger was standing in front of me, saying my father had left something behind. I didn't know whether to run, scream, or fall to my knees. All I could whisper was, "I don't even know who he was." Samuel's gaze softened. "You will," he said. "But not yet. When you're ready." He slid the envelope toward me across the counter. My name, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. And for the first time in my life, I felt the ground beneath me shift. I didn't open the envelope right away. I just stood there, frozen, staring at it like it might vanish if I blinked. For years, I'd convinced myself that my father was either dead or had never cared enough to look for me. And now, some man in a dark coat was standing in a diner saying my father had left instructions. My heart hammered in my chest, and the world around me faded into background noise, the chatter, the clinking dishes, the smell of coffee and grease. All I could focus on was that envelope sitting on the counter, heavy and silent. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why after all these years?" Samuel Crane took a slow breath, his eyes never leaving mine. "Because," he said, "your father wanted you found only when the time was right. He believed that understanding comes after surviving." I didn't understand what that meant then. But his tone carried weight, like every word had been chosen years ago and rehearsed countless times. I picked up the envelope carefully. My name was written in bold strokes, Noah Reed. The handwriting didn't belong to anyone I knew. But it felt deliberate, like each letter had been written by someone who'd thought of me often. I didn't open it there. Not in front of strangers. Not in that diner that smelled like burnt toast and soap. Instead, I took it home, to my small rented room above the hardware store. The walls were bare except for a single cracked mirror and a lamp that flickered when the wind blew through the window frame. I placed the envelope on the table and stared at it for hours. It felt heavier than paper. Like it carried the weight of my entire life. When I finally tore it open, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the flap. Inside was a small stack of papers, yellowed slightly with age. The first was a bank statement. My eyes skimmed over the numbers without processing them at first. Then I stopped. The balance read, $73 million. I blinked. Then blinked again. That couldn't be real. I rubbed my eyes, looked again. The number didn't change. $73 million. And it had my name on it. My stomach flipped. My throat went dry. I whispered out loud, to no one, "There's no way." I thought it had to be a scam, a mistake, a cruel joke. But then I noticed something else inside the envelope, a handwritten letter. The paper was thin, the edges worn. The ink had faded just slightly. At the top was one word written in bold, slanted handwriting. Noah. And beneath it, the letter began. "My son, if you are reading this, then I am gone. There is no way for me to know the kind of man you have become, but I have carried you in my heart every day of my life." I froze. My eyes stung, but I forced myself to keep reading. "When you were born, I was already living under threat. My name is Jonathan Hale. I built a business that grew faster than I could have ever imagined. But with success came enemies, people I trusted turned against me. When your mother became pregnant with you, I realized anyone close to me would be in danger. I had to make a choice, the hardest choice a man can make. I stepped away, not because I didn't love you, but because loving you meant putting you at risk." My hands trembled. My breath came unevenly. All those years I had cursed him. Hated him. And now, I was reading words that rewrote my entire life. "I made sure your mother was safe. I gave her what she needed to keep you protected. But I could not stay. The people who wanted to hurt me would have found you both. I asked my most trusted friend, Samuel Crane, to find you when it was finally safe, when you were old enough to understand that my distance was not abandonment, but protection. I had to stop reading for a moment. My chest ached. I leaned back in the chair, pressing the letter against my chest, unable to breathe. For years, I had believed I was unwanted. Now, I was learning I had been hidden. I looked around my tiny room, peeling wallpaper, a sink that leaked, the hum of the neon light outside the window, and felt the world tilt. This couldn't be real. It was too big. Too heavy. But the letter wasn't finished. I left a trust in your name. Not just to give you comfort, but to give you freedom. You have survived things no child should. You have been broken, and yet you endured. That strength is why I believe you will know how to use what I left behind, not for luxury, but for purpose. You are not forgotten, Noah. You never were. You were not abandoned. You were protected. The last line was underlined, heavy, dark ink that bled slightly into the paper. I put the letter down and stared at it for a long time, feeling the tears roll down my face before I even realized I was crying. That single sentence, you were not abandoned. You were protected. Cracked something open inside me. All those nights under bridges. All the hunger. All the years I thought I didn't matter. And now, with one letter, it all shifted. It wasn't joy I felt, it was everything at once. Shock. Anger. Grief. Relief. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet. But for the first time, I understood him. I reached into my backpack, the same one I'd carried since I was 16, and pulled out the old silver locket my mother had given me. I'd always believed it was all I had left of her. But now, I realized it was the only link between both of them, the love that stayed and the love that left. I held it tight and whispered, "You did what you had to do." Then, through tears, I said something I never thought I would. "I forgive you, Dad." That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there, reading the letter over and over until the ink blurred through my tears. Because for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't broken. I was found. The morning after I read the letter, I woke up to sunlight cutting through the blinds, the paper still on my chest. I had no idea how long I'd been sitting there. My eyes burned, my body ached, but inside, something felt lighter. For years, I'd carried this armor of anger. And for the first time, it didn't fit anymore. Still, I couldn't stop asking myself the same question. Why didn't my mother tell me? Why did she let me believe my father had abandoned me when all along, he'd been protecting me? I had to see her. It had been almost 15 years since that night, since she stood in that doorway while Colton threw me out. I didn't even know if she still lived in the same town. But part of me knew she hadn't gone far. With the little money I had saved, I took a bus back to Birmingham. As we pulled into town, every street looked like a ghost from a life I'd buried. The diner where she used to buy me milkshakes, the grocery store where she worked double shifts, the bridge where I'd slept. I stood outside her apartment building for nearly 10 minutes before I could move. It was smaller than I remembered, pale paint peeling off the sides, flowers in the window, a sign of someone still trying to make beauty out of what's left. When I finally knocked, I heard footsteps. The door opened, and there she was. Her hair had turned silver, her face thinner. For a second, she just stared at me, her hand shaking against the doorframe. Then she whispered, "Noah?" Her voice cracked on my name. I hadn't heard her say it in years, but it still carried warmth, the kind that could melt stone. She reached out, touched my face, then pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "I thought you were gone," she said through tears. "I thought I lost you forever." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't fought for me that night. But when I looked into her eyes, all I saw was guilt. Years of it. We sat down at her small kitchen table, the same kind of table we'd once shared breakfast at when life still felt whole. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I slid the letter across the table. "I think you should read this," I said quietly. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. As her eyes moved down the page, tears began to fall, one by one, soaking into the wood of the table. When she finished, she pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "He really did love you." I nodded. "He did. He just couldn't stay." Then she said the words that broke me in ways I didn't expect. "I didn't tell you because I thought you'd hate him, and I thought you'd hate me for letting him go. After he left, Colton made me believe we were better off pretending your father never existed. He told me I'd lose everything if I mentioned his name again. And after a while, I started to believe him." Her voice cracked. "After Colton threw you out, I looked for you. I called the police. I asked anyone who would listen. But after months turned into years, I thought you didn't want to be found." I could see the shame written across her face. I reached over, placed my hand over hers, and said, "Mom, you don't have to explain anymore. I forgive you." She stared at me like she didn't believe what she heard. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were different, not from guilt, but from release. We talked for hours, about Dad, about Colton, about everything that had happened since. When I told her about the letter, about the money, about how Samuel Crane had found me, she covered her mouth in disbelief. $73 million, she whispered. I smiled softly. Yeah. But honestly, Mom, the money's not what matters. She looked confused. Then what does? I took a deep breath. The chance to make it mean something. The next few weeks passed in a haze of paperwork and meetings. Samuel helped me navigate lawyers, banks, and endless documents. Everywhere I turned, people treated me differently. Suddenly I wasn't invisible anymore. But inside, I still felt like the same kid under that bridge, cold, hungry, and searching for meaning. That's when the idea came to me. I kept thinking about the kids I'd met on the streets. Tyler, Reese, and dozens of others whose faces still haunted me at night. Kids who had no one to fight for them, just like me. I couldn't change what happened to me. But maybe I could change what happened to them. So, I decided to use my father's money the way I believed he would have wanted, to protect others who had been forgotten. I started small, a foundation for homeless youth in Birmingham. We opened a shelter with warm beds, hot meals, and counselors who listened. Then we built another in Tennessee, then in Kentucky. We didn't just give them food and a roof, we gave them a future. Job programs, education help, therapy. The things I wished someone had given me when I was 16. Every time I walked into one of those shelters, I saw my younger self in their faces. One night, a boy about 15 asked me, "You ever been on the streets?" I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "For longer than I should have been." He stared at me. "You don't look like it now." I laughed softly. "Neither will you one day. Just don't stop fighting." That night, as I walked out of the shelter, the cold air hit my face, and for the first time in my life, it didn't sting. It felt like peace. I realized then that maybe my father's greatest gift wasn't the money. It was the lesson he left behind, that love doesn't always stay close. Sometimes it protects from afar. A year passed before I realized how much my life had changed. I wasn't the boy who slept under bridges anymore. I wasn't the kid who flinched every time someone raised their voice. Now, people called me Mr. Reed. They shook my hand, asked for advice, wrote articles about the man who turned his pain into hope. But the truth is, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to make sure no one else ever felt as forgotten as I once did. Every time I visited one of the shelters, I'd sit with the kids, listen to their stories, and remind them, "You're not broken. You're just waiting to be rebuilt." And every time, I'd think about my father, the man who vanished to keep me alive. His absence had been my greatest wound. But now, it was also my greatest teacher. Because from that emptiness, I learned how to build meaning. One day, I visited Samuel Crane's office, the man who had changed everything with a single envelope. He was older now, but his eyes still held that same quiet strength. He smiled when I walked in. "You've done well, Noah. Your father would be proud." I looked around at the framed photos of the shelters, the programs, the kids who were now in college. And I said, "He didn't just leave me money. He left me purpose." Samuel nodded. "He knew you'd understand that eventually." For a moment, we sat in silence, two men bound by a promise from someone long gone. Then I asked, "Did he ever say, 'Why me? Why wait so long to tell me?'" Samuel leaned back in his chair. "He wanted you to see life before you saw wealth. He believed the years you spent surviving would give you the heart to use his gift wisely. Pain," he said, "is the world's most honest teacher." I swallowed hard. Because deep down, I knew he was right. I thanked Samuel for everything he'd done, for keeping his promise, for carrying my father's final wish. When I stepped outside, the sun was setting, the sky painted in gold and violet. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small under it. I felt seen. A few months later, I went back to my old town. The scrapyard where Colton Briggs once worked was gone, turned into a shopping plaza. He'd left years ago, and no one knew where. I didn't need to find him. Forgiving him didn't mean forgetting what he did. It just meant he no longer held power over me. I walked to the bridge where I'd spent that first night after he threw me out. The same rusted beams, the same hum of the highway. I stood there with the wind cutting across my face and whispered, "You didn't destroy me. You built me." Then I took out the silver locket, the one Mom gave me all those years ago, and opened it. Inside was a tiny photo of her holding me as a baby. It had always been my reminder of what love looked like, even when it was scared. I pressed it to my chest and smiled through tears. Today, when people ask me how I went from being a homeless teenager to inheriting $73 million, I tell them the truth. Money didn't save me. People did. A mother who broke but still loved. A father who vanished to protect me. and strangers who believed my life was worth searching for. Every night, before I fall asleep, I reread that letter, the one my father wrote decades ago. And I always stop at the same line. You were not abandoned. You were protected. Those words remind me why I built every shelter, why I shake every hand, why I listen to every story. Because there's someone out there right now, cold, scared, and convinced they're forgotten, who needs to hear the same thing. When I think about that 16-year-old boy standing outside his house with a backpack and a broken heart, I wish I could tell him what I know now. I'd tell him, hold on, Noah. The pain isn't your ending, it's your beginning. You'll lose everything before you find yourself. But when you do, you'll realize you were never worthless. You were just hidden until the world was ready to see you. The night my stepfather threw me out, I thought my story was over. But it was only the first chapter of something greater. Sometimes we're broken so we can be rebuilt stronger. Sometimes we're cast aside so we can learn to stand on our own. And sometimes, we're hidden because love is trying to keep us safe. That's what my father did for me. And that's what I'll keep doing, for every kid still waiting to be found. So if you're listening to this right now, remember. You are not forgotten. You are not worthless. Your story is not over. Thank you for staying with me through mine. If this story touched you, please give the video a like, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment about your journey, and subscribe so we can keep sharing stories of struggle, survival, and redemption.